This video is going to be on the homelessness experience and, in essence, what I've got done to get over to where I am. Uh, Tomorrow I'm going to be doing stuff for graduation for my college, so I wanted to go through a couple of things and focus in part on my experience with homelessness. Um, for starters, for those who don't know or don't really follow the channel too well, I'm disabled. I have Ehlers-Danlos joint temporal mobility disorder, among a couple of other conditions, Raynaud's, asthma, spinal issues. But I'm still physically pretty strong, at least in terms of my muscles. And I have an associate's in health and human services that I transferred over to this college with about 7 years ago. And then, with almost none of the courses overlapping, I did a bachelor's degree in environmental studies. So, because of financial aid and my income being so low due to just really SSI, SSD, and for a little bit, a small amount of money that I was earning from my job, which is to say, not even $600 a month. When you deal with taking what they took out from SSI, it added up to under $300 a month. So again, we're not talking about money that really made it to C in terms of paying my way through college. At about cost of $11K a semester. The reason that my husband and I became homeless was that I was in a subsidy program that basically said that they didn't want married couples to live together, and they kind of, when I got married, and even though it was against the law to do so, they basically said, either you pay most of the cost of what this would be without the subsidy, or you should leave. And my thing was, I can't leave, and I'm not leaving, so you could take your stupid subsidy and shove it. And I kicked them out. And then I changed the locks, and because they grabbed the key to the apartment, and because we couldn't really afford the rent, and we were waiting too long on a settlement, which is to say a dispute where my husband was co-inheritor of an estate that took way too long to settle, we became homeless. We couldn't afford the rent. And then for a brief time we were able to stay, and I was able to, at least to some extent, complete a semester that I was in at Ramapo College. And then via enduring the shelter system, I really couldn't get back to school until after I was out of the shelter system, after I had paid my debt to them. And then another snafu in terms of happened with regards to me trying to register and them not deregistering me as I thought they would, ended me with another charge, which I then took a long time, took as little time to pay off as I could, but that was still ended up being waiting until the settlement money came in. And that's why I had about a 3-year break. And so in August, really, I'll complete my last course in the college. And but in between, in terms of the intake center for New York City, which was the closest shelter to where we lived in Rockland, the closest shelter system that would even, that would accept us. The intake center, adult family intake center, which is to say adult couples, could be parent and child, could be spouse, any, two people that have some kind of familial connection. And yes, same-sex couples, it's the same deal as marriage. And yes, sometimes it's 3 or 4 people living together, but it's just adult families. What the system was is that you came in, and you had to wait around, in essence, for each time you got in there about 23 to 28 hours. And you were not allowed to charge your devices during that time, in terms of your phone or whatever. There was no payphone that you could get to use. The lights were on all the time. You had to sit up in the metal chairs. You could not even pick up your feet. And in theory, you were offered 3 meals a day, but if you had any dietary restrictions whatsoever, in essence, you couldn't eat it. And quality food was not necessarily good there, so you might be faced with food poisoning if you could stomach what they offered. Toilets didn't always work. They did have bathrooms, but sometimes either gender bathrooms would not be working at all and would be locked, sometimes for days at a time, and among other issues. And again, on the way in, and really on the way out, you were treated as a criminal. You couldn't have any piece of glass on you, which is to say, I had my glass jar, the tiny little spice jar of turmeric confiscated on the basis of the glass could be used as a weapon. I kid you not on this. My husband, who's a magician, he had a couple of his magic things confiscated on the basis of they could be, somehow criminally used. We had a can opener, a manual turn can opener, again, confiscated on the basis of it could be used as a weapon, and in that same facility, 2 people managed to smuggle in BB guns and fire them in said facility. So, by them stealing our first can opener, we actually learned how to smuggle things in, because we needed a can opener because of the fact that the food was unsuitable, and without a can opener, we could not open the metal cans of food that we were buying. So in order to avoid starvation, we learned how to smuggle in items through metal detectors. We also managed to survive these periods where, in terms of in those metal chairs, where we got almost no sleep. And keep in mind, we also, when they gave us directions in terms of how to go to and from the intake center to other facilities, they generally gave us train letters and/or numbers, but they didn't tell you where to go from there, and it could be up to 1.5 miles from the actual station to where the building was, and they didn't give you any further directions from that. And they could really send you out, and at times they did, at just about any time of day or night. Generally, it was during daylight hours in terms of out from the center to whatever, but when it came to from the temporary shelter to the facility, you might very well have to travel during dark time, when it was dark out, which is to say before the sun rose. Even though you had to arrive whenever they sent you back to the intake center, which in general it took 2 or 3 times through that intake center, which is to say the 23 to 27 hours before you were accepted, you had to deal with, in essence, almost no sleep for, in essence, 2 days, because they'd have you needing to get there by 9 a.m., even though they generally would not see you until at earliest 11 to 12 noon. And if you arrived there 2 minutes after that 9 a.m., you were rejected and you had to start from scratch. In terms of the application process, you had to have some kind of documentary evidence as to where you were for about a full year before you came in. And again, this was a homeless shelter system. And this is one of the reasons and ways that if you were actually on parole, you were favored, because that's easy proof. You could just go in, you could easily print that out, and they would accept that, and you would scoot through. If for some reason, you had a more complex situation, which is to say you had multiple places that you were living and you were kicked out, or if your documentation was destroyed, or if you even had to sleep just on the streets for one night as you got to the shelter, you could be rejected on that basis. So this is one of the reasons that my husband, in terms of the drudgeries of travel, did land in a couple of ERs. And the food situation, this is one of the reasons that we nearly died several times in travel, because we were not allowed to, most of the time, to leave our bags behind. So we were carrying around like 100, 150 pounds of bags on these like 2 to 3 mile hikes on almost no sleep, almost, if not absolutely, no fluids. And again, both my husband and I are disabled. So when some people, and I get this, they say on the streets, they're like, I don't want to deal with the shelter system. I want my freedom. I do get it. If you're strong enough to survive that and you don't have very long, you have something that you kind of know is coming up quickly. I kind of get the concept of people not wanting to even enter the shelter system in New York City. I did, but even as I was there, at times I questioned leaving. They nearly kicked me out because I couldn't provide formalized letterhead for staying out during a period of about 3 hours one particular night. That formalized letterhead didn't exist. Instead, I was going to my college. I did have 3 professors that were willing to vouch for me instead. Really, that should have been enough, but it wasn't, and I was still threatened with getting kicked out of the shelter with my husband if I, quote unquote, did this infraction again. So, and these were the reasons why people like us, we get sick, why many others die in trying to endure this. There were many times when I just about fell in front of cars in terms of crossing streets. Same thing with my husband. Right? So, again, because dehydrated, no food, no sleep, and lost, because we didn't know our way around the 5 boroughs of New York City at all, and we weren't really given directions. So, beyond my life experience before that, and since then, I do want to caution people, for those who especially, laud the concept of, oh, we have an advanced system here, we have homeless shelters. It's like, oh yeah, you have a really advanced torture system. I'll give you credit for that. And oh, by the way, it's not like the shelter system is not really funded all that well. City and or state combination taxpayers are shelling out more than $5,000 per person per month to torture people in the way that my husband and I were. Shalom.